Hi, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Wellbeing Show. And I'm really happy to be doing this one because my good mate Sherry is here. And we were just talking before the show that we haven't actually seen each other's faces. And I know this is virtual, but we haven't actually seen each other's faces since before the pandemic. So Happy New Year, because I haven't seen you
Happy New Year.
quite. And amusingly, we are filming this on Valentine's Day. When it goes out, it won't be Valentine's Day, but it is actually Valentine's Day when we're filming this. And it struck me that Sherry is a cardiac nurse, so she knows quite a lot about hearts. I'm going to asking her about hearts and how they operate soon. They're actually very interesting organs from a sort of neurological and physiological perspective. And Sherry's taught me a lot about them, which really opened my eyes, actually. I was quite surprised. And so we'll get into some of that. Before we do, just to remind you, the show is pre-recorded because obviously it won't be Valentine's Day when you're watching it. So don't call me because I'll probably be out doing something else. But do send messages if you wish to me on +44 7506 319 745. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Sherry to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about who and what she is, and then we're going to find out more. Hi, Sherry. Welcome.
Hello, hi Noel. Thank you so much for having me back in your show. I was really excited to receive that invitation. Loved it. Loved it the first time, and I'm sure this time is going to be amazing as well.
Even on Valentine's
Thank
Day.
you.
Even on Valentine's Day, and having
Exact. And
taken
happy
you away from Mr.
Valentine's.
Thor.
I thought, okay, we haven't seen each other for more than 4 years, 5 years. Valentine's Day. Noel, what are you trying to say? No, jokes apart.
I'm
It's a
the
great
joke
day to meet.
Valentine present. I'm the joke.
Well, I've already received my presents though, but
That's
great.
good. Has Thor been on the case? He's already sorted it out.
Indeed. Indeed. Yes.
Just for
Yeah.
people who don't know, Thor is Sherry's husband.
Which actually real name is not Thor,
Yeah.
but we
But
like
you
it.
nicknamed him Thor, didn't you? It's
I
sort
did
of,
indeed. Yes, I
yeah,
did indeed. Anyway,
tells
Noel,
you.
so it's a great pleasure to be here with you again.
So you have a background in nursing, stress
Mm,
management, breathing. Yeah, where did you sort of tell us a bit about you? Where do you come from originally,
sure,
your families?
sure. And it all depends how far back you want to take this conversation because there's a very interesting part
Are
of
you a
my
believer in
background that.
reincarnation? Are we going to go back several
Oh no,
centuries?
not that heavy today. Noel is Friday also.
Okay, it's Friday. It's
Not that
Valentine's
type
Day.
of
Let's keep it
therapeutic,
light. All right.
dynamics today. Let's keep it
Yeah, okay.
easy.
All right. Okay, let's keep it easy.
So, about me. So my full name is Sherezade, but it's far too long, so everyone calls me Sherry. I'm originally from the Canary Island, from Spain, but I have been living in the UK, in London, for the last 13 years, and
Yeah,
that's what I call home,
yeah.
especially London. And so, talking about background, depending how far back you want to go, if we take a trip down to memory lane
Go
20
on.
years ago, or a bit more than 20 years ago,
Not
I
been that
was a
much more
ballet
than 20
dancer.
years ago. You're only 21, so
Oh, yeah, thank you, Noel. Thank you so much. Now that's my second best present in St. Valentine's.
right. Go on, let's keep going down memory lane. Tell us about your upbringing.
So, memory lane 22 years ago, I was a ballet dancer.
Yeah.
And I danced at quite a professional level for a number of years. And this is really when I fell in love with movement, expression, wellness, and well-being, and health, and especially mental health, as I was also surrounded by, unfortunately, a number of colleagues that suffered greatly from mental health disorders. So that's
Yeah.
really where things really internally, without realizing, unconsciously kicked in, Noel.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's really an important part of the background.
Yeah.
Moving a bit forward, I went to university at the same time that I was dancing, and I studied nursing. I became a nurse practitioner, and I did a master's in cardiac intensive care, cardiac ICU.
Hmm.
So I always had a great interest in hearts, because it's a fascinating organ. We can, be talking about the heart for hours and hours, but this is just a short show, so I'm not going to bore people with how
Yeah,
amazing the
never
heart
bore
is.
anybody. Tell me what the bridge is between the dancing and then the nursing training.
You want the honest answer or the one that
Yeah, go
sounds
on.
nice?
Go on. Give me the honest answer.
Right, so I always wanted to finalize my degree as a dancer, as a
Yeah,
classical dancer.
yeah.
But I was very kindly advised by my parents, especially my mom, that I needed to go to university and have a degree, right? And
Sure.
at the end of the story was the best thing I did. So I thought that nursing was something that I could do alongside dancing. That
Okay.
was easier, and I actually loved the degree, absolutely loved it. I
Yeah.
loved looking after people. I loved talking to people, understanding them, the way
Okay.
they talk, and accompanying them in the most difficult times of their life, most of them.
And people might be surprised that it's a degree as well. I think we have old-fashioned notions about
Oh,
nursing and training, don't we?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, in Spain, it's a 4 year degree,
Yeah.
university degree. It's exactly the same as becoming a physiotherapist, or doctors obviously have a much larger years, but it's a 4 years degree, and then depending 18 months or 2 years of masters, and that's what I've
Yeah.
done. So
And
four years of plain nursing, and then
I
two.
imagine there's also quite a big crossover in the sort of physiological stuff. So in my days when I was in theatre and movement-based work, there are a lot of the improvisation texts started with the body and understanding of the body. And so I imagine there was quite a bit of a crossover there as well in terms of you learning about the body and how it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, as a dancer as well, you learn about anatomy, and you learn about physiology.
Yeah.
You know a lot about sports, physiology as well. It's like you learn to really listen to your body carefully and deeply. For example, when the heart rate increases far too much when you're doing some jumps, or you back in in the
Sure.
stage, you learn to use certain practices and techniques to calm yourself down. Otherwise, how you perform on stage is not the same as when you're calm. And I'm sure
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
having
yeah.
that
No, I mean,
background
I
in
get
yourself.
it. I get
Yeah,
it. And sort of a lot of the textbooks I used to read had pictures of the skeletal structure and the muscle structure and stuff like that. So when you were improvising movements, you would understand what you were doing and how to. But it's interesting as well thinking about certainly in ballet. Ballet is really tough. I mean, it's a really tough discipline. What probably one of the toughest, I would suggest.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you.
And there's a lot of dropouts, but there's a lot of pressure on things like body image and perfection and all this sort of stuff. So you lightly touched upon the idea that there were mental health issues within the profession. Do you mind saying more about it? What the types of things that you were seeing?
Sure. So first and foremost, it's probably the very first time I share this on screen.
Okay.
But
Are you okay to
and
share it
I
on screen?
absolutely, absolutely. It's
Right.
it's also my story, and I've real one of the things I've realized as I came closer to my 40s, Noel, um, I'm totally okay to share things that used to be a taboo for my own soul, right?
Sure.
Only my therapist knows that. But anyways, when I really started to notice that ballet wasn't as healthy as I thought it was, I always thought it was my passion, is when
Mm.
I started to really see the detrimental effects of my own self-esteem being quite badly affected, mainly by teachers, or all the performers. And I was very lucky to have immense support myself, but I was witness of many of my friends and colleagues from the dancing school that didn't have so much luck and went
Yeah.
to the road of having eating disorders or severe depression,
Yeah.
generalized anxiety disorder, and including bipolar disorder, undiagnosed for many years,
Mm.
and still pushing and pushing us that, and suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation as well. So yeah, I'm happy to share it. I never went to that stage of having a disease per se, a condition,
Yeah.
but for many years I struggled with my self self-esteem and self-identification as well.
Sure, sure. And also compounded, I mean, it's a sort of body perfect sort of profession. It
Yeah.
really is. And people don't understand just how much of it is about the shape of your body, the proportions of your body and stuff like that. I mean, it's the same in all performance arts. Like in theatre, you often get cast just simply on the way you look. The assumption is you have the skills, right? And you do. Everybody has the skills, and then they're looking for body types, and the pressure is enormous. But also, I think there's a gender issue as well. That there's a pressure on women that is
Mm.
additional to that. And you're nodding
Absolutely.
away. You think that's correct, right?
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. Especially Noel. Well, things have changed now in the ballet scene. I'm not heavily involved now, but things have changed, luckily, right? But we're talking about 20, 25 years ago. I started dancing when I was 4, right? So that far back, it was really, really hard on female dancers, not so much on male dancers.
Yes. No,
Yeah,
I agree. I mean, it was like the standards were unrealistic. And also, and I don't know, we may, you may not want to discuss this, but also certainly in theatre training, it used to be quite abusive in psychologically. And, I think of things like Grotowski and the Poor School. You won't know about that director, but I don't know if you know, but a lot of his students ended up sort of really broken psychologically. And there was a theory of acting still there to some extent that you have to break down people's ego to get them in touch with their creative soul. But of course, that's not true. It's actually not true. But it was actually a way to create a lot of abusive relationships within the profession. I think I know that that was also going on in dancing as well.
absolutely, absolutely. I can share with you a very short story.
Sure.
I've always had and I'm happy to share it as well. I've always had a love-hate relationship with time.
Mm,
Always. It's not that I'm scared of growing older for how I'm going to change, but it's what I'm actually going to miss, right? So, I've always also done a lot of therapy myself, and as a therapist now, you need to know where the things come from. So, and I remember, Noel, as far as yeah, it's like 20 years ago, when I was about 12, 13, I had a ballet teacher. He was fantastic. He was a French ballet teacher from the French school that during the ballet sessions, he used to say, move your body now. The older you get, the more useless you be. So that stick to my mind. I was only 12 and that stick to my mind forever. So
rubbish
every
notions
year,
of a child.
absolutely, every
Terrible,
year that
dreadful.
passes is like,
Yeah.
God, it's just so deeply ingrained. And I've done therapy, I've done all sorts of uh, you know modalities to try to get this out, but every year in my birthday it's like, he's
You hear
there.
that voice. I mean, it's sort of we have to be very thoughtful about what we say to children. We have to be thoughtful about what we say to each other, but certainly to children who don't have the appropriate psychological defenses to filter out rubbish and say, well, no, that's just rubbish. Do you know what I mean? And it becomes part of who we are, and then we're left with a legacy, and we know that that the internal critic isn't something we were born with. It's a gift from adults who should know better, right?
Yes. And more than that is also your, the way you is your self-worth as well. Is like, okay, so that means that the older I get, I'm not
Yeah,
going to be as
absolutely.
wealthy as now. Obviously, when you grow older, you realize that's a amount of rubbish. But when you're a kid, it's like you embrace that as your truth.
I don't miss my 20s at all.
Me neither,
I
Noel.
miss that, mate.
You know,
Like, I'm growing
me
old
neither.
absolutely disgracefully, and I'm loving it.
Well, going
I
words.
really am. I really am. As you know, it's my birthday celebration soon. I decided to have a 5K run just to punish people who are still around.
Wow. Wow. Happy birthday, by the way.
And I'm calling it "Do Not Resuscitate." So
All right then.
I've
Okay.
got
As
my
long
DNR in place, mate. And as a nurse, you damn well better respect it.
certainly will. Certainly will.
Anybody tries to revive me, you jump in there and let me rot away on the floor.
Stop it.
Great stuff. Um, so I mean, let's laugh about it, but it sounds like it was actually quite difficult, but you were lucky that you had some good people around you. But there's a lot of casualties from that type of environment, and people should really be aware of that. And it's also informing any people listening who are in their training. Um, make sure that you get reality check on what people are doing around you. And particularly post Me Too, the Harvey Weinsteins of the world, they exist. We should be aware of this. We should be aware of grooming and manipulation, and we should be aware of being trained into being abused and all that sort of stuff. And it's really important. And certainly as a creative person and also somebody who works in psychological health, the old training models of breaking down the ego are wrong. They don't work and they just cause harm. And so if somebody's suggesting that to you, tell them to jog on is my advice. Do you know what I mean?
Tell
It's like,
them to do a 5K run.
well, that's not abuse. It's
According to
hard
your
work.
truth.
I said it's an easy run. I didn't say it was going to be a hard run. So you can walk it if you want. So you're then in this space where you're getting a lot of support, but you're also your parents are gently suggesting that you need some sort of qualification. There's a lot of resonances here for me with my story because I started acting at 5, and theatre was my thing. That was it. That's where I felt alive. And my parents suggested that I sort of similarly go and get a degree. It didn't work out for me. Later on, I got professional qualification, which was the best decision I'd ever made. So tell us about the training as a nurse, and then what are you aware of now? How, if you unpack it, why you chose working around the heart specifically?
Mm. Oh wow, this is a very moving story,
Okay.
which I'm going to share with you and with everyone else that watched the show. How did I start going into cardiology? It's interesting, but how did I decide to stick with that as my profession? It's
Yeah.
very, very loving one. So while I was in university training as a nurse, year three, I think it was a year four, year three, we were taken to a special hospital in Barcelona, which is one of the best ones in Europe, by the way, for heart transplant.
Okay.
So yeah, fabulous institution. So we started reading about, understanding more about reading the heart. And I really thought about it, it's like reading the heart. What is that? So we learned how to read electrocardiograms,
Mm,
ECGs, right? And surprisingly, please do not ask me where that comes from. I became quite good at it.
mm.
I have no idea how. Maybe past life, Noel, who knows?
Who knows?
But
Maybe
it
you
is an
were
art and it's
an ECG machine in a previous life.
maybe what yeah, who knows? But anyway, so that's the truth. So and it's literally like learning a new language because
Yeah.
it's so complex. It's
They are
incredibly
interesting. They're
complex.
like a really interesting musical score. Very
Correct.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but complex, Noel, right? And obviously, when the heart is upset, as we call it in medicine, upset, the ECG will look in one very specific way, and when the heart is diseased, it will look in a different way, right? It's not always the same language. It's not always the same graph at all. So that fascinated me, and I said, "That's what I want to do," and that's how I actually did, a master's in cardiac intensive care, the type of nurse that sits looking at a monitor almost constantly, making sure that the cardiac patient is actually okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And when you think about it now, uh, what's the fascination, do you think?
wow,
You try and
what a
unpack it now.
question! What a question! It's very complex, but it's also very simple. It's not not everyone can actually read someone's heart in that way. So when I tried to explain that, I just lost it a bit. But when I try to explain it to my patients or to the, colleagues that I work with, it's if I describe what I do, it's I read people's hearts and try to understand people's minds.
Yes.
Because reading a heart, you need a very specific qualification to read an ECG. Is how the person's heart is actually behaving. You can actually be talking to someone, having a completely normal conversation, but if that person has a heart that is not functioning well, the heart will actually tell you, not with words, just by looking at that ECG. So that
Yeah.
fascinated me. There's a lot of
So
philosophy
yeah, I know it's
behind that
interesting. And
statement.
because one of the things that I learned from you that I didn't know is that the heart has its own executive functioning. By executive with functioning, we mean decision making. So executive functioning, we always thought was something in the forebrain, higher executive decision functioning, a function of this bit of our head specifically. But then we now know, don't we, that the heart can make certain types of decisions independent of the executive functioning of the brain. So would you mind just describing that a little bit and sort of
Absolutely, absolutely. That's absolutely correct, Noel. The executive functions mainly still, resides on the brain, this brain, but we also have a very small brain in the heart, right?
wow.
When what we talk brain, right? It's a conglomerate of neurons.
Yeah.
That's what we need to understand. So we actually have three brains. We have the brain that's in the head, the brain that is in the heart, and the brain that is in the gut, right?
Yes.
So, but if we talk about the
Glad you
brain
mentioned
in
the
the
gut. We'll talk
heart,
about that more. Yeah. Yeah. Go on. Tell me
sure.
about the brain in the heart.
The brain in the heart is fascinating. It's so the heart on its own, it's a relatively very small organ, and it has approximately 40 to 60,000 neurons. Not many, as the
Yeah.
brain has billions,
Yeah.
but 40 to 60,000 neurons in the heart is sufficient to understand that the heart has its own memory, cells that can actually remember and memorize, and can also be triggered depending on certain emotions or experiences.
Hmm.
I have been first-hand witness as a therapist and as a nurse to deal with people and patients that have had a heart transplant.
Hmm.
Their stories are fascinating. I have not
Yes.
watched this on TV. I
Yeah.
haven't
Yeah. Yeah.
watched it
Yeah. Yeah.
on
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
TV series. No. When you actually do counseling or a very specific form of therapy with these people, you need to acknowledge that they're also carrying 40,000 neurons that used to belong to someone else.
That's right.
And I have heard stories. Obviously, it's not that your life changes drastically, right? From a physiological point of view, it does, and from an emotional point as well. But the fact that a person can remember or can feel something different towards a food, for example, or towards a place in the world is fascinating.
It is. It's extraordinary. What's extraordinary as well is that
Extraordinary.
if we think about our own emotional relationship, not just to our own hearts, but to others, so if we listen to somebody's heart that we love, we treasure it. I mean, we have symbols of the heart everywhere, and they have multiple sort of meanings. And one would think the heart was a huge organ, right? It's sort of from the way
No.
we think about it and experience it, like sometimes it feels like it's this big, but of course it's not. It's got to fit inside here, hasn't it? And
Mhm.
it
Yeah,
does an
yeah. It's like
extraordinary
a small
job.
fist. That's it. That's like the
Right.
heart. It's literally a fist,
Yeah.
but it's a really, really strong guy. It's a very, very strong organ, but
Yeah.
it's also a very, how do I say it? It's a very delicate organ, and it has its own mind and its own personality.
Yes, yes, yes. And which is a really interesting way of thinking about it. And I think people think of sort of medical approaches as very much like there's a list of symptoms, there's a list of treatments, but actually, and to be honest, I would encourage an approach that you're discussing, which is that when we're discussing somebody's organ, we are discussing somebody. Do you know what I mean? We really are. There's a person. And we
Yeah.
need to be engaged with that, with the fact that there's a whole person. Tell us about the gut as well, because there's far more brain cells in the gut. Am I
Yes.
right in thinking there's more than in the actual brain itself? But that's not true.
Well, there actually there's a school of thought, especially more in the functional medicine spectrum. I am not an expert in gut at all. I just have a very, very small knowledge about it, which
Yeah.
I will share it with you, but it's not my area of expertise. They try to direct a bit more, much more emphasis on the gut, like having more, neurons than the brain, but that is actually not true.
Right.
The organ that physiologically, when you study it, the brain is the guy that has
As the most neurons.
the
Okay.
neurons. Yeah,
Yeah.
he has the soldiers. But there's a very interesting relationship between the gut and the heart, and obviously the gut and the brain, right? But the gut and the heart is also in a fascinating relationship.
Tell me about that. Yeah,
And
really.
yeah, especially, I've in clinical practice, Noel, I've seen it many times with people with GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, severe anxiety, and depression. Most of the time, due to where the neurotransmitters in the gut, are created,
Yeah.
um, they the brain also gets affected, and a lot of mental health conditions are also affected when the gut is actually not healed or is
Exactly.
not working
Yeah.
properly.
And also,
And it has to do with the neurotransmitters
yeah,
and all the healthy bacteria that we need to make the brain function properly.
yeah. And also this, I think I'm right in saying, but again, you may know more about this, but in terms of SSRIs, which are a standard medical treatment for anxiety and depression, actually more of the medication is used by the gut than the actual brain. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That is correct, Noel.
Right. And which is an extraordinary thing because we think, don't we? We think that what happens is we take this tablet and it goes and fixes our brain, but it isn't. It isn't, literally isn't doing that, is it?
Mm. If, for example, we have a condition that's called leaky gut, right, or
Yeah.
dysbiosis in the gut, the SSRIs will actually not work or would not work as effectively as they should.
Yeah.
Right. At some point I wanted to share this with you as well, but last year I embarked into training again. So I'm doing a fellowship in psychiatry,
Yeah.
which I'm finding extraordinarily difficult. No, I'm not going to lie, it's extraordinarily difficult. So one of the avenues that we explore thoroughly, it's conditions such as depression,
Yeah.
ADHD, many mental health conditions, and the effect of the gut in both healing the gut first before prescribing any medications. And
Yeah.
I can we can have another very interesting conversation around the amount of pharmacological approaches that don't even take any notice of how the medication is actually being going to be digested or embraced by the gut.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating,
And it is
honestly,
it's sort of insane, isn't it? Because when we take medication, the vast majority of medication we take is in pill form. It's going to go into our mouths and go through the digestive system. And if we're not thinking about sort of that impact, what's happening within that, it just seems really strange to me to sort of that should happen.
yeah.
And the gut and heart relationship, could you
There's
say a bit
less
more about
studies.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, there are much less studies having, been done bringing these two organs together. There are some, for example, when the heart is on distress. Let's say we've had an emotional shock, or we are,
Yeah.
going through a very intense grief. What happens is that the very receptors of the heart send information down to the gut, right? So we are unable to eat, or we eat excessively.
Yeah.
We may have also GI problems, yeah, tract
Yeah.
issues as well. So, but it hasn't been researched as thoroughly as, for example, the gut and the brain, or
Yeah.
the heart and the brain.
Yeah.
There's less studies, but still, it's these three friends are connected.
So we're getting some of the connections. I think there's more than the number of brains you suggested, because I usually think that the central nervous system is another brain, and it has autonomous functioning with our musculature, as you know. We don't think about picking up. We don't need to think about it. It's controlled by the spinal column and the central nervous system, and we're beginning to understand some of those connections as well. I would also say there's another brain, although it's not physical in the sense of it's not sited inside a body. There's a thing that in psychology we often refer to as the social brain,
Mm.
how our brains interact with each other, and sort of mirror neurons and things like that. So I'm I would suggest that there's another one. I'm getting quite a bit of strange lag on my video. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm seeing it.
I can, yes.
I
Yeah.
don't know what that is, but we'll just sort of work through it. I don't know if my sort of there's something wrong with my whatever. Doesn't matter.
Oh, mine's
Um,
working fine. Oh, I think. Yeah.
going to come and go, I think. So I can see why, as a creative, emotional person who expressed stuff through dance, you would also connect with this heart work. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can see that. I can see the
Mm.
connection myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And
and then
let's,
you go on. No,
sorry,
carry
Noel,
on.
sorry.
No, no.
If I may add one thing, there's this, an area of study. It's called neurocardiology. Is part of what I do in clinical practice as well. So neurocardiology is not only how the heart and the brain communicates, but also places special emphasis on how the heart rules, right, most of our decisions. And this is it's very, very interesting because
Yes.
what this area of, it's pure medicine, right? It's more to do with cardiology than psychology. But what it's believed is that what we've been calling intuition for so long,
Yeah.
right? It's really how the heart communicates with another heart. Don't forget that the heart also has its own electromagnetic field.
Yeah.
Remember, I told
Yeah.
you that
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well.
Bearing perception and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
exactly. So it is believed that the interoceptive awareness is the intuition that we have with our own bodies. This is what's going on, what
Yeah.
happens. When I teach mindfulness and meditation, I always talk about the interoceptive awareness, but this is internal. But the awareness of how is the other person, acknowledging that, how is that person feeling, what is it, transmitting, that has to do with the electromagnetic field of the heart. That has been researched extensively
Wow.
with HeartMath Institute, and it's been proven. So
It's
it's how
extraordinary.
we relate to each other.
It
It
really
is
is extraordinary
extraordinary. It's an
stuff, isn't it?
extraordinary organ.
Absolutely. And we as humans are extraordinary as well, that we are so fundamentally set up to be social and interactional with each other. Do you know what I mean? Like literally our organs are communicating with each other and checking each other out. I mean, it's like it's mind blowing, isn't it? That sort of
It
thing.
is. It
But we
is.
are
To me, it
really
was
set
mind
up.
blowing.
It's super. And then I presume from doing the work with heart transplant patients and also patients who'd had heart surgery and stuff like that, you then developed an interest in the rehabilitation and also stress management and mindfulness. Was that the next connections for you?
Yeah. So how I actually became more interested in really understanding or trying to become a better professional with cardiac patients was when I took a position as one of the few, and I say few because there are few, arrhythmia specialists in the NHS. That's
Right.
about 11 years ago. So, and I'm going to share with you one thing that still happens in the NHS, Noel.
Yeah.
As nurses, right, regardless of the amount of training you have in arrhythmias, in cardiac rehab, in prevention, it doesn't matter. Um, we still don't have the sufficient training or tools to go and speak to a person that have just had the most horrendous
Yes,
diagnosis
exactly.
or traumatic experience,
Yeah.
right? We don't. We have to be honest, right? Nurses, we do amazing things, but psychology is not one of the strong parts of our degrees, and we have to entirely be honest. Anyway, so as an arrhythmia specialist, one of my main tasks was to do ICD counselling,
Yeah.
right? And for those that don't know, ICD is an defibrillator, implantable defibrillator that patients are placed on the left side or the right side, depend on the heart when they have a diagnosis of cardiomyopathy or if the heart is failing, right?
Yeah.
So this is a very, very traumatic experience. Not only going through the surgery, but how someone's life changes so drastically. From yesterday, I was healthy, I ran a marathon, I collapsed. Now, all of a sudden, I need a device as a life-threatening, technique. Anyway, so we were the ones, cardiac nurses, arrhythmia specialist nurses, are the ones in charge of going to speak to, this patient. And there was a time where I said, I don't really know how to support this person's emotion. It doesn't matter how compassionate I am. It doesn't matter how much, empathy I show. I still don't know how to support this person's emotions. I don't know how to support this pace for
Mhm.
this person to feel safe. Because ultimately, the person was not interested in knowing how many leads the devices have, how many, cables, not even how they're going to go into theaters.
Mhm.
They were really, really touched by how is my life going to change. But
Yeah.
then on the other hand, Noel, I'll be very honest with you. And I'm a big critic on, wanting the system to be better, but internally. At the same time, you have the psychology department, which are fantastic and excellent professionals, but equally, they actually don't know how our device really works.
Yeah.
They really don't understand the psychology behind a cardiac patient. They don't really understand the fear, the innate fear from this person, to go home with a device.
Yeah.
So
But
you
ordinary
have
folk would
this,
understand it.
it's very complex.
I think ordinary people would get it, right? In the sense of, if I put it like
Yeah.
this, somebody's heart has broken. We know what that means, don't we? And if somebody's heart is broken, we sort of know as human beings, when we over medicalize it and over technicalize it, and this is the interesting thing I think I have about the heart, is that a broken heart is an actuality now. So when we have a loss, our heart loses something, doesn't it? It knows that there's a
Yeah.
loss, and it functions differently. And something you said earlier on was really interesting. There's a difference between when the heart is upset and when the heart is ill.
Yeah, yeah. Good
That's
that you picked it up.
extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's
Good that you picked
extraordinary.
it up.
Yeah. So, so what you're suggesting is that that we know quite well how to deal with when the heart is ill and there's a problem, we implant a machine, but we then have to deal with the fact that it's upset about that.
Exactly that. And that is the right term, the medical term is called neurocardiology.
Yeah.
Is once the heart is upset, right, it will actually create very specific thoughts. It increases the chances of that person to have, anxiety, to go into depression,
Yeah.
to have a different chemical, reaction, higher levels of cortisol. We know that this is science, but we don't really have much time to explain it to a
We
patient.
don't, but we need to acknowledge it, I think. And then in the terms of rehabilitation and working, so how did you then begin to sort of get to understand the role of breath, mindfulness,
Yeah.
stress management, which is one of your amazing areas of skills? I mean, you have loads of them. With the fellowship in psychiatry, does that mean I'm going to have to start calling you doctor soon?
No, never. No.
That's a classic nurse
No.
response. I knew that would press that nurse button. Don't ever call me a
We've
doctor.
known each
I'm
other
a
for a couple
nurse.
of years, Noel. No, I'm still looking after people.
I knew the nurse in you would rebel about that. Great,
Let
because
me clean my stethoscope. No.
nurses know far more than doctors. We all know that, and doctors are there to
Oh,
help
no, no,
facilitate.
no.
So
No,
tell me about.
we know different stuff.
All right. So tell me about the movement into the breathing, the mindfulness, the
Yeah,
stress management. Yeah.
sure. That came a little earlier than, my transition from a cardiac nurse or an arrhythmia specialist nurse into my private practice as a therapist. That came earlier when I was still a dancer. I remember that happened in Barcelona. I started, this story is one of my favorite ones in my life. And I'm going to also share it with you how I started into breathwork and movement. I I was in university first year, and I became very, very friends very friendly with a guy that was my patient, right? Nothing happened. It was just a very pure friendship.
Yeah.
And this guy was only 27. We're still friends nowadays.
Right.
And he had a Hodgkin lymphoma, very aggressive. So he was very lonely. He used to live in Europe, not in Barcelona, but he was from Spain. So he was very lonely. And the very first time that he had some time out, he said to me, I would like to go to a yoga class. I'm like, oh, no, what? What is yoga for? I was 20
Yeah,
years
right.
old, right? So what is that? And I said, yeah, there's a class in Barcelona Center, yoga for cancer. I'm like, oh. Anyway, Noel, I said, okay, I'll go with you. Listen, that's fine. You know, let's go. So I started my very first yoga, breathwork, and meditation class amongst people that had cancer.
Wow.
Yoga for cancer. That was my very first introduction to yoga. And Noel, to me, it wasn't a moment of enlightenment, but it was literally like I said, that's my ikigai. I'm going to teach people how this practice, whatever on earth these people are doing, I want to learn.
Right. Super.
It was one of the most healing,
Super. Yeah.
beautiful moments I had in my life.
Same
So
as
that's how I started.
yeah.
That's how I started. A couple of years later, I became quite a serious yoga practitioner alongside dancing. And and then when I came to London, I did a course for 2.5 years, and we studied yoga as a form of therapy,
Yeah.
meditation, the philosophy of yoga. So it's a 2.5 years course, quite thorough, and that's how really I started, implementing breathwork, movement, meditation, and mindfulness
Right.
with my patients, literally.
And what's the value of this, would you say, as a clinical practitioner? Why would you do these types of things? What's the benefits for people?
Oh, it varies and it's a tremendous benefits. An example, for example, in cardiac rehabilitation, we know that when we control our breathing, when we exercise at the very early stages of cardiac rehab, we have a much better prognosis of the heart healing efficiently and effectively because we increase the oxygen consumption, we self-regulate the nervous system, so we have less chances, less likelihood of the heart going into arrhythmias, despite the fact that this person is already on beta blockers. But in terms of the stress management, for example, is we now know that a patient can control the levels of cortisol that is running free in the wild stream, in the mainstream, in the opposite because of our bodies.
Yeah.
So the effects are tremendous, and this is for cardiac rehab, for example. If we focus on any other type of arrhythmogenic conditions such as atrial fibrillation, we can calm the anxiety that comes from having a very fast heart rate, such as in atrial fibrillation, and we can assist on regulating the heart rate through breath work if
Yeah.
the AF is manageable. So yeah, the benefits are tremendous, and if we then, as if we transfer that into the mental health spaces,
Well, we know for
even
an
worse.
absolute fact now, don't we, that stress is implicated in every severe and enduring mental health problem. We know that stress is implicated in every lifestyle health problem, so diabetes, etc., heart disease, etc., etc., etc. So stress hormones, learning to manage stress hormones, cortisol is one of them, is crucial in being able to have any form of well-being whatsoever. All right. And it's also crucial in
Absolutely.
managing conditions such as schizophrenia. We know that. You know that because you do that work for me, literally. And so it is probably one of the most important things that people need to learn. It's also one of the things I think, quite annoyed with in the press is that,
Mm.
you get these older guys that look like me poo-pooing these ideas of stress management, saying, well, during the war, we did this. That's not true. If you look at the UK just after the Second World War, that's the highest level of murder rates, the highest level of home breakdowns because of the effects of trauma and stress, etc. So it's just nonsense. We know that It's a crucial thing to learn. Mindfulness, what's its role in all of this? Tell me a bit about mindfulness. I know it's like a
Right.
2,000-year-old practice, so how are you supposed to? But give me some things about it that you think are important to know.
Brilliant. So, in very, very short, because I'm so passionate about, and I'm also a, very open and a big critic on how these practices are seen, especially in social media, is something that I criticize quite a lot. So let's actually really, really talk about mindfulness and what really mindfulness is, right?
Yeah.
In reality, mindfulness, it's a stage and a practice that comes from meditation. So what someone very intelligent in the US did is, okay, I'm studying meditation, right? And I've realized that this stage can actually be used in the Western world
Yeah.
to help people to slow down or to be present. But in reality, mindfulness is one of the stages of the practice of meditation. This is what the ancient texts, explain. So mindfulness, simple words, is the act of being present in and focus in whatever you feel you need to focus on that at that time. Mindfulness can be me here, having this conversation and being present and being aware of every single word that comes out of my mind, and being aware of your face expressions, being aware of my bottle of water that is here, right? But when we use the word mindfulness, we think that we need to sit down, do this, close our eyes. Like,
No.
it's just being aware and mindful, right? Present of what is happening. How am I feeling right now? Right? This is when I teach mindfulness, one of the parts that I teach is the interoceptive awareness, is how am I feeling? What's happening with my heart? Is my heart beating normal? Is my heart not beating normal? Am I cold? Right? How am I breathing? That's it for a couple of seconds. And then the mind shuts off and it gets distracted. So you bring the mind back. So it's just being present, Noel.
And why is that
Simple
a
words,
benefit?
simple explanation.
Why is that a
Sorry?
benefit, Sherry? Why is it beneficial to be present?
Great. So imagine that we have a mind that is literally wild like a monkey, especially in the nowadays. So our minds we have approximately 60,000 thoughts, 67,000 thoughts a day,
Yeah.
right? So mindfulness doesn't only help us to focus on the present moment because it sounds nice, but it also helps us to regulate the response that our nervous system has when our mind is completely wild, right? So that 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes that I take just to pause for a moment, these are a couple of minutes that I'm pausing my physiology and I'm pausing my mind, right? So
And so
that
people
is
should
that's
know when Sherry says regulate the central nervous system, what she means
mm,
for us, what we should understand that is stress management. It's
correct.
all
Yeah. So
about stress
I'll
management. Reduction of stress hormones in the body are it's the gold seam. It's the actual gold seam in terms of health and well-being is the management of stress. We're
You're
running
absolutely
out of time,
correct
I'm
there.
afraid. I knew we would, but that's okay. It's really informative, I think, and also I think the core of it is coming back to the heart as a metaphor and as an actuality. If we're heart to heart relating, we're not going too far wrong, I think, in our lives. That's sort of a key takeaway. And although it's not at the center of our body, it sort of feels like it is, right?
Mhm.
And as we begin to understand the connections between the gut, the brain, the heart communicating to another, the mind communicating to another, we are sort of making the world a better place without a doubt. Without a doubt. In terms of the sort of services you offer and how people might get hold of you, give us a quick sort of shopping list of what you offer and where people might be able to get hold of you.
Shopping chart. So what I offer is essentially now I don't practice as a nurse, as a clinical nurse anymore in the NHS. I run my private practice for the last 8 years. So I became a counselor, as you know, and then I run my practice in central London and a very small practice in Zurich in Switzerland that I opened last year. And shopping cart, what I offer, so exactly as every other therapist, comprehensive evaluation, as a counselor, and I specialized in cardiovascular conditions and all sorts of different conditions regarding mental health. I use breath work, which is something that we haven't had time to talk about, but it's a fascinating topic as well. I use therapies that focus on breath work, mindfulness, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, meditation, stress management, biofeedback, and yoga as a form of therapy as well. And
Right.
I do that from
Um,
virtually or in my practice in London.
and how can people get hold of you? Have you got a website or
Interesting.
social media?
I have my website. I have very precisely and specifically not been big on social media.
Okay.
So you can find me on my website, which is www.rhythmiabreath.com. And I'm
That's
in
the
socials,
spelling
but
that's
very
on the
little.
screen. Rhythmia breath is the spelling that's
Yeah.
on the screen right now. Okay. .com. And people can use contact form, stuff like that to get hold of you.
Yes, correct. There's a contact form, and then I tend to reply in less than 24 hours. And then also I work with different consultant psychiatrists and consultant cardiologists that they also refer me a great number of patients to.
Brilliant. Look, Sherry, it's been wonderful to have you back. I hope you and Thor have a lovely Valentine's. I'm sure he's got something gorgeous sort of planned for you. So enjoy your day.
So
And thanks for coming on and sharing your joy and your enlightenment in life with us. So super. And I'm really happy to have seen you again. It's been ages since I've seen you. So
yeah, yeah,
really
I know.
pleasure for me, mate. Absolute pleasure.
And thank you for the invitation, Noel. Really, I can't believe that we've already, used an hour.
I know.
And I'm really thankful. I'm really, really grateful. So thank you very much, not only for being on the show, but also for letting me be part of your incredible sort of, group of professionals.
Thank you very
It's an
much.
honor.
Yeah. You stay there, folks. I hope you've enjoyed that. Do reach out to Sherry. She's a super consultant as well for anybody working in sort of health and well-being. Wealth of knowledge, really super. If you've got teams that need some training around these things. Bye bye for now. You stay there, Sherry. Bye bye for now. Hope you enjoyed it, folks. And then I'll see you at the next well-being show. So you do take care, everybody.